All right. This is BX Blues for the divinenature.net. BX Blues for the divinenature.net. www.divinenature.net. I'm going to do a really quick one because I wanted to take this off my plate. And this one has to do with answering the question: did Zoroastrianism influence Judaism and Christianity? Did Zoroastrian did Zoroastrianism influence Judaism and Christianity? Okay, that's the question. And our friend, our one of our neighborly so-called atheists here on Stereo sent me a link, and this is an argument that I haven't really looked into. I never heard much. And when I tried to do some research, I noticed there weren't anything over the surface type. There wasn't a lot of information out there, so I had to do a little digging. And and the reason why I want to do it this way at this point, I actually wanted to get deeper on this. This podcast is going to be a very over the surface study, but this is so far what I found concerning answering the argument at hand. And I pinned a Wikipedia on the Avesta, and people are going to be saying, "Oh, Wikipedia, Wikipedia." But as it turns out, that after I did what I could in terms of research. I read some of the papers that were sent to me and linked and all that stuff, whatever. And I noticed that the only thing that was sent to me seemed to be concentrated on the so-called similarities that are found in Zoroastrianism within Judaism and Christianity, but it doesn't get into deeper and more and weightier issues of the argument, right? And so I'm like, okay, so I'm going to look into it, and I'm thinking, okay, what really is needed for to be able to argue for the validity of a said religion, right? A religion, a belief system, right? What the argument is that they're comparing that Zoroastrianism influenced Christianity, that all of these tenets come from Christianity, right? And I kind of did a over the surface search, and I don't have a lot of time to look into this and whatever, but what I was able to find, I mean, I went over all of the tenets, and yeah, cause I'm just gonna ramble off what I found in my examination of this, and I'm pretty much convinced that the argument is false, right? And so this is what I found out, right? So my argument against this religion influencing Judaism and Christianity, okay? There's a number of pointers. Number one, the arguments for this is primarily focused on those supposed similarities. While similarities do exist, the differences are still vast and wide differences. And later on in a later podcast, I want to demonstrate and examine how different, if I can, if I get a chance to. I want to take that's the other phase of this argument, going against this argument, to demonstrate how how the differences are greater than the similarities, even though there are similarities. Now, I didn't want to center my argument there because even if it's a 10% similarity, I'd be asking, like, why should there be any percentage of similarity? Why should this religion have so many, somewhat or shabby similarities at all, right? And it's a fair question. Why should there exist any similarities, let alone 10 or 20 of them or 12 of them, or. So, but to focus on the similarities is not really the weightier issues of the argumentation, right? Number two, and those who just settle on arguments of similarities are avoiding more weightier aspects to this argument. The historicity of the man, who's called Zoroaster, and what he taught, and the proof of both of that. Okay? So that's really the weightier part of this argument. is the historicity of the man, what exactly he taught, and the proof of both of that, right? Number three, influences of other religions like Islam. Also, there are also found similarities within Zoroastrianism. It's not just Judaism and Christianity, all right? So those practices are there also, not just Christianity or Judaism. Okay, number four, scholarship is primarily unsettled in various points. Like when I looked into, I kept looking and trying to read into this, right? The life of, the life of Zoroaster, the location of his birth, his prominence, the variability of language changes in the text throughout time. Okay, these are the things that I noticed reading them, that there's a lot of scholarship with issues in these areas. All right, where Zoroaster came from, the location of his birth, his prominence, and the variability of the languages, the changes, and the issues that are found within the text that they did find, that they do have. All right. Number five, the consistency of the. If this is the time when things started to be written down, Christianity or Judaism. These are there also, not just Christianity or Judaism. Okay, number four, scholarship is primarily unsettled in various points. Like when I looked into, I kept looking and trying to read into this, right? The life of, the life of Zoroaster, the location of his birth, his prominence, the variability of language changes in the text throughout time. Okay, these are the things that I noticed reading them, that there's a lot of scholarship with issues in these areas. All right, where Zoroaster came from, the location of his birth, his prominence, and the variability of the languages, the changes, and the issues that are found within the text that they did find, that they do have. All right. Number five, the consistency of those tenets throughout time is unknown. If writing down only began after the 5th century AD, which many scholars propose, right? So the 5th century AD, that's after Christianity, and if this is the time when things started to be written down, which some many scholars believe, then how do you decide? Okay, wait a minute. How do you decide how long ago did this practice take place? We don't have that consistency. We suspect many scholars go as far back as even as far back as 1700, okay, BC, of this man's existence. And yet, even with the earliest views of going far back into time, you don't have proof that he believed what uh, current Zoroastrians believe. We don't know that that's what he believed ever since that point on, from that point downward. You don't know because the literature is found after the existence of Christianity. Okay? So again, point number five, the consistency of those tenets through time is unknown. If writing down only became, if the written word, the text was only penned after the fifth century AD, which many scholars propose. Number six, the earliest manuscripts are a fragment that was found that dates to 1325 AD. That is the most genuine fragment in the manuscript, and it was found 1300 years, over 1300 years after the life of Christ. Number seven, the Avesta, which is the Zoroastrian text, today is only a copy of a copy that dates back to 200 AD. Okay, after the life of Christ. That's what my investigation came up with. Now I'm open to any critique on this. If anyone knows any better on this, but this is what I jotted down, examining this in the way that I could in my busy schedule. This is what I jotted down. Okay, I'm open to critique on this, but this is what I got. All right, the Avesta text today is only a copy of a copy. It wasn't even an original, and that copy dates back to 200 A.D. So basically, the very few Zoroastrians that exist today, that they say the number between 120 and 200 to 300,000 Zoroastrians in the whole world, they're basically following either the part of the hymns that they use only exclusively, or they're using the Avesta text. Okay, that only goes back to 200 and let's see 200 approximately 200 AD, and that was a text that was copied from a text. It wasn't a text that was copied from an original, right? And that's the only text that was is no longer doesn't it no longer exists. So all they have is a copy of that. All right. Number 8, Zoroastrianism exists as a historical religion, but its tenets can't be verified to have been consistent with the existence of its origin, making it possibly influenced by major religions rather than being the influence of those major religions. So, in other words, the argumentation that says that Christianity was influenced by Zoroastrianism is instead the evidence demonstrate that it's the other way around. Okay, because yeah, it can the Zoroastrianism or Zoroaster or the historicity of this person and this religion can go further back, but the text and the demonstration and the evidence of what he actually believed, okay, does not go as far as he goes back. We don't know what goes back. We have evidence today that there's that the that the Zoroastrians that worship in India worship differently than the ones that are still in Iran. Okay, and we have this proof that there have been different um, uh, uh, followings or different beliefs and tenets that have changed. Zoroastrian Zoroastrianism had an element of Mithricism in it, and Mithra was supposed to be a god, right? But not all Zoroastrians recognize Mithricism, right? And Mithricism has a history that when it got to Rome, it ended up going to Rome and coming back from Rome, from the areas that were known as Iran. Uh, Roman soldiers, some of them became they became Mithricists, and they started worshiping Mithra. Okay, and Mithra was a cult, right? So that which basically died out by the 5th century, after 5th century A.D. Right, and so Zoroastrians, not all of them follow that, and so um, there's evidence to demonstrate that if you don't have a sequential, written down theological system that is consistent. And the only way you can demonstrate that consistency is by having documentation or a text. The textual evidence is so scarce and so sparse that you can't say what they've always believed in. But instead, there's evidence, especially in the Avesta text itself, that there has been changes in the writing, in the vocabulary, in the language, and also in the teachings. So Zoroastrian, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So so it's more. Hang on a second. So it's more. So it's more than likely that Zoroastrianism grabbed. So it's more. hang on a second. So it's more than likely that Zoroastrianism grabbed a little bit of here, a little religion from there, and that religion through time and the actual opposite of the claim is true, right? And the reason is because you can't compare it to Christianity, because Christianity, in this sense, in terms of the critical text analysis, Christianity has so much more evidence to pointing towards legitimacy, right? So if you're comparing it to Christianity, in the weightier evidence against that argument has to do with the text itself and the life of the man himself. Some people believe he was born at this time range. Some people believe he was born in other time ranges. Some people believe he was born in one side of the country. Other people believe he was another part of the country. They don't know because there wasn't any writing, and they suspect that for most of this man's life or the life of his religion, it was more of an orally passed religion than it was about writing it down. Right, they weren't writing things down. So how can you say that Judaism or Christianity took from Zoroastrianism? If anything, it's the opposite. Okay, because he goes down to up until the fifth century, and you say, well, how do we then know? Now we have this text that dates back to 200, 300 years after the life of Christ, and we're following that text, and that text is only a copy of who knows what. And so we see all of this text in there. How do you know all those modifications and all those similarities didn't come after 200 and 300 years of Christian influence, right? You can't say that it didn't. Okay? So with Christianity, it's a lot closer to us today. Not only that, but we have good evidence for Christ when he lived, who he was as a historical figure. We have the continuity of what he taught and his followers. We have the evidence of how he influenced the world in which we live in even today. We have a huge array of textual evidence and manuscripts that we could fall back on and see how the belief systems have maintained themselves within 2,000 years, okay? And closer attestation to when he lived and taught. We could say with greater clarity that we can pinpoint who he was to what he taught by way of the textual evidence. We cannot say the same for Zoroaster. All we have for this religion is that it existed way into the past, but what it taught and the consistency of its teachings we can never know with certainty because we can't match the man with what he taught with historical consistency. We can't, right? So all people could say that, well, because it's an old religion and an old system, then it had to have grabbed on all the religions that came afterwards. Okay? But it also has similarities in Hinduism and other religions, Islam, everything else. So it seemed to be a religion that grabbed from other religions. Okay? So I mean that's really all I have. Um, if I were to get deeper into it, I probably would. The next phase of this, I would go into those similarities, right? But then it's just a matter of just arguing, which how similar things are to something else. But the more important is the critical text analysis and the timing of the man when he existed, where he was, placing him in the proper place, and his very teachings and saying that so these people believe this in this year. Now there's mention of Zoroastrianism in the Bible, and it's believed that King Cyrus and King Artaxerxes were Zoroastrians, but the Bible never identifies them as Zoroastrians. They just identify them as recognizing the God of the children of Israel, right? So there's not enough information in the Bible. But history declares that, there was a religion of Zoroastrianism, and that Zoroaster did exist, and he was a real person. But as far as what he taught, what he said, what he did, that we have no idea, because from the very Avesta and the scriptures of their own, they do not, cannot be confirmed beyond the shadow of a doubt. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'll take two messages and then I'm going to mosey on. Torah
But
that.
Beast Blues, Shalom, man. I see you diving into areas that not many people dive into. So good luck there. And I would say that your claim is kind of valid. Um, and yeah, yeah. It's important to always see how like cultures mixed, especially with when it came to the Hebrew people, um, because it's only natural that they would have been influenced a little bit by something else. For example, when it comes to gematria, that wasn't developed until post Torah, and it influenced a bit of like the way that they read the Torah. So yeah, man, yeah, you're doing well.
Yeah, that we also know that in the scriptures, right, it demonstrates that the children of Israel went outside of the parameters of where Yahweh wanted them to go. And it wasn't because it was Yahweh's will that they did that, but they took on religions and and uh, uh, um, traditions that were not original to them, right? We know that if there are similarities, those things are very possible, right? But the we have God's prescriptive will recorded. You shall not do this. You shall not do that in the Levitical law, and it is incredibly stringent and extremely tedious. Every time I read that section of scripture, I have to take long breaks in between because it's just very. You know how hard it is to read the book of Leviticus. It's just crazy. And so to say that, okay, we can identify what is from God and what is not from God, what is something that was taken from the surrounding nations, and to know the narrative of the Old Testament, of the Tanakh, that says that the children of Israel then did what was right in their own eyes, and they followed and they did what the pagans were doing. That is understandable. We're not going to debate that because we see that within the text, right? But what is proper and what is uh, there by God is pretty explainable. It's very detailed because God gave it to them without question. So I'm just answering Malik, who gave this to me as a homework assignment for me to go in there. And since I've never dealt with the issue of Zoroastrianism, I said, well, wow, okay, so it seems kind of weird. And he sent me a couple of links, but I noticed that some of this information was focusing more on similarities, more on similarities, more on similarities. They were drunk with the picking out the similarities, and I'm like, okay, but it's really the importance doesn't really rest so much on the similarities. Show me what they believed and the critical text of what they believed and what they said and what they taught. That's really where it is, because you can have a history going down deep into history, but if you can't prove that that's what they believed from the very start, and unfortunately for Zoroastrianism, their their critical text is extremely limited, and it's just a copy of a copy that dates back to the second century. That was way after Christianity even. So you cannot say that it robbed from Judaism and Christianity. And then you see Hinduism in there, you see Islam in there, you see Christianity in there, Judaism in there. Well, what do you assume? That the copying had to go the other way around. It had to be the Zoroastrians that were picking those things up. And then scholars believe that's exactly what they did, and it could be seen that there were differences in the writings and the different um, cultures because it was so old. You see, and so there's not enough text. There's not enough physical evidence to argue for what they actually believed. What they now believed is based on a copy of a manuscript, which is all they have, and that's what they're operating on. I mean, that's what I gathered from the best I can do within a couple of days of looking into it myself, and I pinned Wikipedia not because it's a cheesy uh, a way to research anything, but because, as it turns out, I ended up coming back to Wikipedia to basically confirm a lot of what I had already found. And I go, well, Wikipedia has it pretty has pretty much what I've picked out. You know, um, a lot of it, seems to be what I ran into in terms of videos, in terms of other conversations and other writers and other scholars that tend to be saying the same thing. Some they argue they don't know if he went back to 1700 BC or 600 BC. They don't know. But even if they went back as far as 1700, that is Zoroaster, that's still about 200 years short of when we believe the Torah to have been written. So regardless, but you know that the naysayers want to find a way to cut things down, and it's just not there for them. Okay, Rondo.
I got a quick question, man. And I don't know much about Zoroastrian, whatever the religion is. I'm just doing quick Google searches as you talking. But it sounds like this religion goes back to the BC period. Before I ask any question, do you agree that the prophet that was deified goes back to the BC period?
The prophet Zoroastrian, he has a different name. I'm not at home. I'm not by my desk. But yeah, so he did exist. There's history that he did exist. They have him in many different literatures, and they believe that he did exist. The problem is pinning him to what he actually believed and what he actually practiced. Coming into all those religions, we can't say that because the manuscripts of what they believe now is not. Uh, it's not good enough. It's not, or rather, it's not. Uh, you know, it's not consistent enough because it only goes back to that copy that's dated to 200 something 200 years after the life of Christ, 200 to 300 years after the life of Christ. You can't say that we know he existed, but yet we don't know what he believed. For all we know, he believed in chocolate, being our salvation. And somewhere down the hundreds of years, he switched it up 50 different times, or his followers switched it up 50 different times because they either didn't write things down, or because of war and pillaging and whatever, they got rid of um, all of those whatever they did write. We just don't have it, and if we don't have that writing, we cannot give critical text legitimacy to anything people believe. That's just how it is. For Christianity and Judaism, we have that, and we can rely on that, and then we could say that's consistent then throughout history, throughout the thousands of years up until now. So we can stay consistent because the scriptures are consistent. They stay in that sense, but you can't say the same thing for Zoroastrianism. So all you can say is, oh well, he went further back, and he seems to be. Also, they also argue that not everybody believes that it was the first monotheistic religion because within the religion, it's said that what's his name? His name is Ashunta Mazda, something like that. That he is the only God, but then there's a deity-like substance or other entity that's also said to be godlike, right? So you're either a deity or you're not a deity. So it's a philosophical question and argumentation that the scholars are still trying to figure out to this very day. There's some Zoroastrians that consider that negative entity a god, and some of them don't. So then what is it? You have to go to the text And the text, the current text, will probably clear things up. But then what about the text before that? Because that was only a copy, and it only goes to 200, 300 BC. What did the text before that say? We don't know, right? We don't know how it has changed over the hundreds of years. Okay, so is it the first monotheistic religion? I don't know. It, and then there's also seven other entities that are like angel, or no, six other angel-like entities that are either six on the evil side and six on the good guy side. Okay, so it's debatable whether they're actual entities. So if they're entities, then it's not monotheism, because they say that the similarities of this dualism between good and evil, but that's not the way it is in in Judaism or in Christianity. In Judaism and in Christianity, it's only one God, and that one entity has three persons, right? As in terms of Christianity, but he's still one entity, and Satan is a created being, which is extremely explicit in the text. So it's far different than what Zoroastrianism teaches, and it doesn't have a similarity in there, and it's a very um, overt distinction that's in there, right? And so, yeah, so I this is just an over the surface analysis of my bullet points of what I found looking at those. There's other sources and stuff like that that you could look at. You could read the actual literature. That's like maybe like 400 pages long of the Avesta, and try to read the what they actually believed, and you'll see those similarities, and they'll be similar, especially to people who are not Christian, who are not Jewish. Okay, and they'll seem like similarities, but I think the differences are way more vast than the similarities, right? And then even if that's the case, even if it were exactly the same, how can you prove that they actually believe that if all you have is a text that dates back to a copy of a copy, found dated back to the second century, over 200 years after the life of Christ. So you see what I'm saying? I personally think that it's a slam dunk against Christianity as it is. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I may come back with a second part to this. Maybe yes, maybe no, but whoever enjoys this, I appreciate it. Okay, until next time, God bless.